Okay, cool. I'll just hold on to this. We'll roll this. Anyway, the talk I'm going to be giving is called Future-Proof Your Software. And however, I want to make a key point here that future-proofing your software is only slightly part of that point, because we're not future-proofing your software as far as code. We're future-proofing your software as far as you. Intrigued? Hold on to that thought. All right. You moving? Come on, roll with me. Good. All right, like I said, so future-proofing, really? No, we're not really future-proofing with technology. As I said, if we're lucky enough, all of us are going to deal with the effects of aging. Sorry to break that to you, but it beats the alternative if you think about it. So here's some stats that we can play with and think about. So I call this the high cost of quote unquote living. So baby boomers have first reached their standard retirement age in 2011. So a little over a decade ago. Roughly 10,000 baby boomers have been retiring every day and continue to do so and will do so for another 11 years. After that, you just got the holdouts who just don't want to go away. Here's the one that kind of hurt me to see for the first time. Generation X. That's my generation. We'll see their first age 65 retirees now actually because when I originally wrote this talk, in 8 years, 2034. The key point to this is that what we want to mention is a lot of us, especially Generation X, we're the first generation that had that transition point into technology. We had it earlier, got a chance to transition into it, but we're the last generation that is actually going to have that transition. Millennials and Gen Z have always had the internet in their realities, which is kind of wild to think about. Actually, always is a little bit of a stretch. Older millennials were predating for that. Gen Z, definitely. The internet has always been part of their reality. Technology has always been part of their reality, which is cool or frightening, depends on how you want to look at it. So what are some issues that we're going to have to deal with? Vision is going to be one of them. You don't have to volunteer, but just in case, how many in this room are over the age of 45? Okay. How many of you at your 45th birthday got to wear these for the first time? This is common. I realize in the talks, I've said this the wrong way. My father is a physician, and when I told him about this, and I had said, I've got a couple of talks where I have mentioned this, and I don't know if I've got it correct. I've referred to the fact that what happens to our eyesight is that we have vitreal hardening. He said, close, but not exactly. The sponginess of our eyes does start to decrease, but it actually has more to do with our cornea than it has to do with the sponginess of the inside of our eyes. Point being, our eyes are good at jumping back and forth, and we can depth of field and autofocus up until about age 45. By that point, it gets a lot harder and our depth of field gets fixed. And that's why we need reading glasses to move that diopter so that the light hits the retina in just the right spot. Mobility is something we're all going to have to face with. Arthritis, other physical conditions, Parkinson's disease is a disease specific of age. Our hearing perception might go down. I'm actually quite surprised because I've been a professional musician, and by virtue of being a professional musician, hold on, that takes care of it. Having been a professional musician, I honestly was surprised that I would reach my mid-50s, which is where I am right now, and that I would not have significant hearing loss. I had expected by this point I'd be 30% deaf. And surprisingly, I'm not. I either took very good care of my hearing or I was just very paranoid about what I allowed to go into my ears. Many of my friends, however, who played in the scene that I am in, significantly worse off than I am in that regard. More than 30% hearing loss, or the issue that would probably drive me absolutely insane. How many here know what tinnitus is? Quite a few of you. Okay, for those who don't know what tinnitus is this persistent ringing that happens in your ear, and it does not go away for an extended period of time. If somebody told me I had to deal with a persistent ringing in my ear, that would probably drive me insane. So I'm extremely fortunate that I haven't been there yet. That's not to say that I might not get there eventually, but here's hoping. And there are cognitive issues that we all deal with. Alzheimer's is definitely a disease of those who are older, although interestingly enough, it can hit you at younger ages. I had a family friend who developed Alzheimer's in his early 50s, and that is an anomaly, but I've been hearing it's becoming more and more common. So yikes. The key here I want to talk about, so accessibility and inclusive design are two things I talk about very extensively. They're not the same thing. They have similar aims and they do work together, but there are distinct differences between what they are. I'm not going to read these exactly, but you can read along with them if you want to. These are the formal definitions of what accessibility and inclusive design are. Accessibility means that you are doing whatever it takes in your product, in your software, to be able to allow somebody with a primary disability to be able to get access to that information. Oftentimes, it requires assistive technology to do it. If you have somebody who is non-sighted or so low-sighted that they cannot make sense of what's on a screen, by virtue of them using a screen reader, if they must use that screen reader to get to that information, that is considered accessible. You are making it accessible by using that technology to actually aid and help them in that process. By contrast, inclusive design uses a lot of those techniques, uses a lot of those skills, allows you to structure your data to the best of your ability, but as an example, you're not necessarily having to use a screen reader to do that. It could be you're allowing closed caption for hearing impaired, but those who are sighted will be able to see that just fine. You are, perhaps in some cases, you have audible streams that you can describe what's happening counter to what's going on. So you don't necessarily need the assistive technology, but you have different avenues that will allow you to get the same information across. That's the difference. We also have two classifications. I'm not one who likes to use the term able-bodied versus disabled. It's semantics if we want to get right down to it. Also because of the fact that when you say that somebody is able-bodied or you say they're disabled, you're making a line. Like there's a hard line here. If you're on this side of the line, you're able-bodied. And if you're on this side of the line, you're disabled. And that's not reality. Our abledness, if you will, is a spectrum. And we can be anywhere along the curve. Some people are profoundly disabled and chronically disabled. We call that a primary or chronic disability. However, every one of us can find ourselves in a momentary or temporary situation where we can likewise be effectively disabled. And that's what's called a secondary or a situational disability. Let me give you some examples for some examples of situational disabilities. Imagine you've had to, well, I'll give you the one that really affected me most profoundly. In 2011, as a matter of fact, getting ready for this conference, just shy of getting ready for this, I had turned in my talk, everything was great and all that was going on with it. This was before we had really good virtual technology for if I wanted to present something. I broke my leg skateboarding. And I don't mean just I broke my leg skateboarding, I mean I snapped all the way through my tibia. I have a lovely scar that runs all the way from my ankle up to the middle of my calf because they had to cut into me and plate me and do all sorts of fun stuff. I was off my feet for 6 weeks, that badly. I could not, and I had to keep my foot elevated above my heart for 22 of those 24 hours so that I could redevelop periosteum and so that I could make sure that I didn't develop blood clots that could effectively channel their way to my heart. And I'm here, so it worked out, which is great. But for that period of time, I became a dealing person with a situational disability that bordered on primary, and we weren't sure where it was going to go. It could have actually become one, but thankfully it didn't. But I could no longer move. My mobility was greatly limited, and I had to exist virtually in a lot of spaces and do a lot of things. And I realized very quickly how difficult it was to navigate around with that. But that was still in a physical space. I still had my technology and I still had the use of my two hands, which was great. I did an epicondylitis surgery on my elbow a couple of years ago, and that took my left arm completely out of whatever I was doing. Seriously, try doing work on a computer when you've only got one arm to work with. You quickly discover that key spreads and commands that have been mapped are very difficult. And if you have to actually hold onto the keyboard while holding onto a mouse at the same time, so you quickly realize, oh my gosh, there has to be better ways of doing these type of things. So moving on with this, I'm going to show you something real quick that is, in my opinion, one of the hallmarks and award-winning examples of exclusive design. But I apologize ahead of time. For some of you, this might trigger a very scary response. I apologize if this makes you anxious. Who wants to tell me what that is? Yes, they are instructions for building a Billy bookcase, and yes, it is IKEA. And the reason why I say triggering, because some people really do get anxious when you have to deal with building stuff from IKEA. I understand, I've been there. But I'm not talking about the building of stuff in IKEA. That's not the point of this. What do you think I'm pointing here, and why am I including this and saying this is award-winning inclusive design? Feel free, shout out. Lack of text, exactly. They have constructed their directions to be as minimalist and as prescriptive as possible. What they have done is they've said, we don't care necessarily what language you speak. We don't have to. We're going to direct this pictographically as directly as we can to as many people as possible. What do you think is one very big benefit of doing that? Exactly, yes. Imagine if you had to print these. How many people get, I see these all the time because I'm a musician and I love getting things like stomp boxes and recording gear. And just about every stomp box I've ever bought from Korg or from Boss or fill in the blank, you get a manual that's about this thick. And you know what that manual is? It's the same 6 pages printed 20 times for every language that it needs to support. That's a significant expense. That adds a lot to what you, that's why many people say, oh, we'll just go online and you can go get it. But in this case, if you're actually building something, you don't know that you've got the online option. So this gives you the benefit of saying, hey, we're going to design this so that as many people can use it as humanly possible with the minimal amount of what we need to do. And why do they do that? It saves them on printing. And by virtue of saving the savings on printing, they have to give you the minimum of instructions, takes the minimum space, takes the minimum amount of printing, saves them money, which they can then theoretically turn back to you and save you money. So here are 10 principles that, and for those of you who are in my talk and saying, oh, I heard a lot of this. Is there something new here? Here you go. This is new. Well, this is not actually new. This is something that we have been talking about since around 2007. I am not the who developed these websites, but they're very good ones, and I want to share them here. So number 1, avoid making assumptions about any of your users as to what they can or can't do. Number 2, your users' technologies are capable of sending and receiving text. That's the only thing you can count on. Everything else you need to either abstract away or consider an alternative. Number 3 is my most precious of all the 10. And if you have to just say, what one thing do I really need to care about here? It's number 3. Users' time and technology belong to them, not to us. Never take control of either without a really good reason. Number 4, you want to make sure you provide good text alternatives for any non-text content. If you have to include a picture, include a way of explaining what that picture is. So what I like to share as an example is, let's say you've got a picture of a 1966 Ford Mustang, 66 Ford Mustang, and it's parked along a beachfront area from Sunset Boulevard leading down to Pacific Palisades. Got a mental image of that? Make sense? I mean, you can kind of picture, by that description, you can fill in the blanks, right? Now, if you have a picture and the only thing your alt tag says is car, that's not very helpful, right? There's a lot more that's being communicated here. And just by saying 1966 Ford Mustang, parked near the beach at Pacific Palisades on Sunset Boulevard, that gives you something to work with. It may not be complete. You may have no idea where Pacific Palisades is. You may have no idea where Sunset Boulevard is. You might not even have any idea what a 1966 Ford Mustang looks like. But you've got an idea it's a car. You've got an idea it's near a beach. And you've got an idea it's someplace leading down to it. Good enough. Use widely available technologies to reach your audience. This is also, when you say using widely available technologies, don't reinvent the wheel, and just because you think it's cool, add new keystrokes that people are going to have to memorize that will only work with your product. Bad design. If you are using screen readers, for example, VoiceOver, NVDA, and Orca are 3 common ones, and JAWS is a proprietary one, but they all have a standardized way of using keys to be able to navigate through them. Why? Because you don't want to have to relearn the wheel, especially if you're dealing with an assistive technology. Use clear language to communicate your message. Minimal, effective, as little artifice as possible. Make your sites usable, searchable, and navigable. In this regard, really pay attention to how you get from point A to point Z. The less steps you need to go through, the better. If you have a product that is menu rich and has submenus upon submenus, I promise you this is going to be a miserable experience for your users that need assistive technology. But even if that's the way that you need to have it for your regular users, there are steps you can do to allow you to step through that with a minimum of pain. It takes some doing, but you can. So design your content for semantic meaning and maintain separation between content and presentation. Again, this has a lot to do with how is your page laid out, and also how do you get from point A to point Z. If you can tab through with the keyboard, easily get to it. If you hit upon a word and it gives you a command to jump you someplace else without you having to remember a whole bunch of steps about how to get there, you're doing a good job. Number 9 and 10 go together, and the easiest way to look at this is don't overwhelm your users. When you're doing any type of accessibility and inclusive design modifications, you want to roll those out gradually, because you're already dealing with users who have not so much limitations. Trust me, some of these users are breathtakingly amazing. How many people have actually had a chance to sit with somebody who is non-sighted and see them use a screen, hear them use a screen reader? Does anybody have a chance to do that? Let me explain how some of these users do this, and it blows my mind. Most of the people that I've actually seen who are adept screen reader users, they crank the speed of the audio to 10x. The amount of time it takes me to say one word, they're saying 10. And they can key on it. I can't make heads or tails of what they're listening to, but they've cued into it and they've trained themselves to it over time that they can listen really and they're able to bounce through that keyboard to get to exactly what they want to hear. And they listen to it at super speed. Okay, great. Now go on to the next. And I have to stop. Whoa, what just happened here? So, oh yeah, it's no problem. I'm just used to this. That's fine. And they'll step me through exactly what just happened. Yeah, I got this, filled in the details here, walked this, jumped this, selected that. Yeah, I just bought something. How over time I realized, wow, because of my site, My ears don't work that way. But if I was sightless, I'd have to step it up someplace else, right? And so they do. But even then, and the key here is, if I were to say, hey, we're going to send you a half a dozen new changes or 3 dozen new changes with the update of our product, they would go, stop. That is too much for us to deal with. Instead, just like agile development, a perfect example of where is agile development and that DevOps model of a little change here and there, just roll it out a step at a time. Accessibility, inclusive design is a perfect example of where you want to do that and why. And the last thing is, as you encounter new technologies, you want to apply the same principles. So when you go to mobile or you go to Internet of Things or cloud environments, all these things still work. And you want to be able to make sure that you apply the same principles. So I have a few tools that if you want to play with this and you want to figure out where you go, here's some that you can play with. The granddaddy of them all, if you will, is Wave. Wave is the one that many people have used. You can find this at wave.webaim.org, so you can just pick a page. Now, the problem with Wave, if you just go the site version, is you can review a page or a URL at a time, one at a time. Not bad. If you just want to get a quick look and go, okay, here's what we got. And as you see, you get a summary of lists, what your errors, what your features are, what structural elements work. If you've got advanced stuff like HTML5 and ARIA in there, it can point out what they are and what you might want to do to fix them. There's also a Chrome and Firefox plugin. And if you have the plugin and you're running it on the side, you can then just load an entire site and navigate through it and see what you find. So that helps a lot. If you want to go the developer tools route, because that's what you're used to using and you're used to using the inspect to see all the stuff that goes in your page, Axe is a great product for this. Also, Axe, tongue twister, give me a second. Axe has a automation library called Axe Core. So if you're doing things like Selenium scripts and you want to run Selenium or WebDriver and say, hey, I want to be able to create some stuff that will give me a quick accessibility audit, and I want to run it as part of my automation suite. Axe Core allows you to do that. That, however, would be enough to cover an entire talk, maybe even a workshop all by itself. Just know that if you want to play with it, go to Deck Systems, look up Axe Core, download it, play with it, have some fun. Screen readers. So we have a number of them here. And in this case, let's see. Can I get that out of the way? Point being, this is an example of a voiceover window. And as you can see right here, visited, link, content menu, press Shift Enter to navigate to submenus. Again, imagine that being said 10 times faster than I just did. But you can the neat thing what I like about voiceover is that it prints it on the screen. In this case, you're thinking, hey, wait a minute, that's a screen reader. Why do we need to print it on the screen? Because there are benefits to having a screen reader that you can actually read. Because when you read it, you can actually see what are my sightless users having to listen to. And if you have a screenshot to say, here's what happens when we hit this command, does that make any sense to you? And they go, oh, yeah, it does not. Good point. So nice little benefit there. Come on, where are you? Here's a neat little tool. This is called the Color Contrast Analyzer. Now, if you use color contrast, you'll notice in my slides, by the way, I've deliberately used, in most cases, black with very white text. This is on purpose. This is what you would need to do if you wanted to have what you were looking at be WCAG AAA rated for contrast. This is at least 7:1, black to white. Now, we can decide whether or not that's aesthetically pleasing or not, or if you like the way that that looks, or if it's tiring as a normal person to look at this. But it does give you the greatest variance and contrast possible. But how do you communicate that to somebody? When you're looking at two colors next to each other, if you have slight beige with a gray text, yeah, it looks neat and earthy. How do you know that you've got a decent contrast to that? Yes, you could run certain tools and it will tell you, okay, yeah, we have a 4.5 to 1. What does that mean? How do you communicate that to somebody? How do you recommend a fix? The beauty of the color contrast analyzer is it lays an opaque mask over it. And if you have the contrast necessary, it peeks through the mask. And if it doesn't peek through the mask, then you know that you do not have a sufficient color contrast. So that's what you're seeing here. Is there anything? Yeah, like for example, right there, that little box that you can click, that does not make the cut. And up here, that doesn't make the cut. But these do, because you have a correct color contrast there. So this is a nice little thing if you want to discuss, hey, how do we match? How do we do based off of what we're looking for? In this case, this is just a simple level AA, medium bold and non-bold large text, a 3-to-1 threshold. So if it doesn't even match a 3-to-1 threshold, it's going to show you. So let's talk a little bit about cognitive analysis. Dealing with people with autism, dealing with people with dyslexia, dyscalculia, or other details. Actually, you don't even need to have these. If you just get hit with a wall of text that just goes on, it's overwhelming. And it's just awful to read. I find it annoying to go to a site and go, I have to dig through this. This is not going to be fun. So one of the tools that I very much like using, and I even use it for my own blog posts, except for when I'm doing live blogging, then I'm throwing you in with the wolves. Good luck to you. I will go back and edit it later when I get a chance to. And when I do, I will take the text and I will drop it into what's called Hemingway. How many here are familiar with Hemingway, by the way? Moss? Only Moss is familiar. Oh, good. I get to expound on one of my favorite tools. Nice. Hemingway is an editor that you can take any text and you just drop it in and it will analyze it for you. And what it will do is it will tell you, okay, based off of what you've given me here, here's where you can make improvements. So in this case, you'll notice that it's color-coded, which makes it nice and easy to look at. So what is the yellow telling me? It's telling me that's a sentence that's hard to read. And what does the beige tell me? Beige is telling me it's a sentence that's very hard to read. So that gives me a chance to look at that and go, okay, these are two areas I can already take a look at, drop through, and see if I can simplify it. And when you get rid of the green says you have a use of passive voice, maybe instead try to use an active voice because that's going to make your message more direct. You have adverbs. Good, but they're meeting the goal of, if you know much about using extended adverbs, this is what we call semantic bleaching. Like if you really think that if this is really very cool, that's overstating something. It's excellent. Right? Don't overtell it, shrink it down. It's easier to understand, even if you're using a $3 word versus a 50-cent word. One $3 word is worth 3 50-cent words when you get right down to it and goes farther. In addition to that, once you clear this up, it will also tell you what your readability scale is. And if you look at the readability scale, your sweet spot should be about grade 8 or grade 9, generally speaking. Context is going to change it. If you're writing for kids, of course, you're going to want to go lower. If you're writing advanced calculus text, I hate to break it to you, there's no way you're going to really be able to explain advanced calculus to somebody at a 6th grade reading level. It's just not going to work. You're good. So judgment call, figure out when you want to use it. Still, if you want to make your text readable, understandable, less painful, this works for everybody. But if you really want something to say, to allow for inclusive design for cognitive disabilities, Hemingway is a great little tool to play with. And here's something I want to recommend too, is the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, has a site called the Before and After Demonstration. And I love pointing people to this because the cool thing about the before and after is very often you will find some developers go, oh, I don't want to make my site inclusive. I don't want to make it accessible. I'm going to have to throw away all my really good tools. I'm going to have to get rid of all the libraries that do all of this stuff. And the answer is no, that's not true. When you show them the before and after and they flip between the good and the bad and they go back and forth and look at the pages, I almost always get the same reaction. Well, what's the big deal? I don't see any difference. Exactly. You don't see a difference because all the stuff that's going on that matters is under the hood. You don't see it. but your users that need to have that adaptation have it. By the way, free gift here. How many people here have gone through at least at one time or another a responsive site design redo? Okay, guess what? You're already 80% of the way to making a site accessible and inclusive. Yay you. Why is that the case? Because if you're going to make a site responsive, you're basically saying, hey, if you have X agent, you need to display this. But if you have Y agent, you need to display this. Hey, guess what? If your agent is a reader, you need to be able to display this. But if your agent is a touch stick, you need to be able to allow for that. You've already got all the plumbing in place. Now you just have to fill in the blanks. Not a bad deal. So yeah, if you want to get way ahead of the curve and people are terrified about the idea of doing an accessibility or an inclusive design overhaul, and that scares them, go the backdoor way. Say, hey, let's make our site responsive. Oh, you mean so they can run on tablets and on phone? Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Ka-ching. So let's start thinking inclusively. You want to make sure that any elements that appear on a screen could also appear on a printed page. Guess what? Printers still exist for a reason. Some people actually struggle with looking at photons blasting into their eyes. There's actually actual sensory issues towards this. Some people will literally take web pages and print them because it's much more comfortable to look at. Simple interfaces are usable interfaces. Don't overdo it. Make your text easy to resize. So this is a specific WCAG recommendation for resizing text. One of the coolest ways to do this, not a lot of people do it, but one of the coolest ways is you can put up in the upper left or right-hand corner a little sizing grid. And it's just a little push lever. And if you want to, you can tab to it, hit the tab key, it will push it over, and it will size everything in proportion. If it doesn't size them, if you have things that aren't not using the proportions, you can blow it all out, and that's not cool. You don't want to use definite pixel size, because if you use definite pixel size and it expands, everything breaks. Not good. And you want to make sure that your text scales uniformly. Increase your line space and paragraph space. White space is your friend. It makes everything easier to read, and it makes everything easier to parse. If you're using color to express meaning, add labels to it. If you're from the States and if you're familiar with a stoplight, green means go, red means stop, yellow means either slow down or drive really fast. However, what if you were colorblind? If I take that pass, caution, or fail out of the way, what do those mean? Do you know? If you're able-bodied when it comes to color recognition, you could make some guesses, right? Metaphorically, it works, sure. But again, what happens if you don't have that ability of making that distinction? Also notice, just to be a jerk, I deliberately made the green a little less green. So now that automatic observation doesn't quite fit because it's not that vibrant green that lets you go or pass or we're good. It's kind of teal. What does teal mean? That's why I put that there. Because to some people, that's the only representation of green they're going to be able to process. That's about as green as it's going to get. And is that meaningful? Not without the label, it's not. Explicit link text. There was a blog that I found kind of amusing. It was talking about the availability of a particular product and how ubiquitous that availability was. How available is it? Well, you can get it from here, or you can get it from here, or 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 from here. 17 times. Now I get it. They were trying to make the point that, hey, this product is ubiquitous and you can get it anywhere. And they were using a little bit of snark to try to make the point. What happens when you put that to somebody with a screen reader though? What here do they want? Do they know? Have they lost the plot by the 7th or 8th? Do they know what here represents? Click here, 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 here. Which here do I click on? They wouldn't know. And it would be really frustrating to try to back up and figure out which one they really need to care about, especially when every one of the links that's here points to a different here. So avoid that, please. Yeah, view our quarterly report, read our newsletter, see the results of our latest survey. Good examples. Click here multiple times, bad. So starting to wrap up here, all the tools that we have here that will allow us to quantify or examine these details, right? Tools can identify our issues and they can assert known states. So we can get a yes or a no out of something. We can confirm that a tag is present. What we cannot do is we cannot confirm that any tools will not say, hey, because we're in conformance, this product is going to be eminently usable for people with disabilities. As a matter of fact, you could conceivably have a 100% compliant product, completely across the board. Everything is exactly to standard. It meets every recommendation that the WCAG guidelines give. AAA, absolute top notch. You have a perfect score. And then you can hand it to another user. They can go, this is garbage. I can't use this. And they'd be right. So the farther along you go in your development, just know the more difficult it is to make modifications. Inclusive design early can make a product usable by everybody. And those last mile steps for accessibility will be much easier to implement. And think about the future, because you might be the people who benefit from your own design. And my last little piece here is aging is a part of life that we're lucky we're all going to face. And by designing our software up front, we can future-proof our software and make sure that it will respond to us. And I'll just let you ponder that. Questions? Like one or more, because I think there's a whole bunch of people about to break down the door. Okay.